Dorothy and Jack returned to the United States in 1967 on furlough, and while on furlough, they pastored the church they had previously been pastors of in St. Louis, Missouri. And then they returned to the Philippines July of 1969, and it was shortly after that Brother Barnes' life was tragically cut short by a bus accident as he was on his itinerary to look at the churches there in the Philippines. At that time, Dorothy and Jack had been married over 16 years. Of course, they had the 5 children. Ministry, and that was just a quick synopsis. Mother. How daunting and overwhelming it would have to have been to have lost your husband tragically, be in a foreign country, 9,000 miles from family, from home, 5 children to care for. Not all of them are the most mild children, or weren't. But she raised them. Her organization had come to the memorial service of her husband and even brought tickets to take Sister Barnes and her children back to the States here. And she simply said, I can't leave. I just can't leave. She always testified about a period of time in that crisis, and that testimony has impacted I don't know how many people. It's touched so many lives. And her eldest son, David Barnes, Pastor David Barnes, is going to come and share that experience.
In Job 35 and verse 10, it says, "Where is God, my creator, the one who gives songs in the night?" Psalm 77 verse 6 says, "I call to remembrance my song in the night." I'd like to tell the story my mother shared with me in recent years of the song that God gave her on the darkest night of her life. When the psalmist said, "I call to remembrance the song in the night," he indicates that it was in a time of despair, a time when he was asking, and I paraphrase, "God, where are you? Do you know where I am?" On Saturday, October 31st, 1970, nearly 50 years ago, my mother received a message to come quickly because her husband had been involved in an accident. Some missionary friends accompanied her on the several hours-long journey to another side of the island, only to discover when she arrived that when the message had been sent, her husband had already gone to be with the Lord. So she made the long trip back with the body of her husband in the car and arrived home late on Sunday night, November 1st. For the next 2 or 3 days, there was a whirl of activity. People were around day and night, and there was so much to be done as preparations were made for my father's funeral on the coming Friday. Prayer vigils were being held every night at the church, and as they were leading up to the funeral. But on the Wednesday, November 4th, my mother told everyone to go on to the prayer vigil without her, since there was some food cooking on the stove that needed to be attended to, and besides, she was weary and needed some rest and time alone. But it was alone in the quietness of the empty house with everyone gone that the overwhelming magnitude of her loss just flooded her soul. And she cried out, "God, how can I go on without my husband, my companion, the love of my life? My parents, my family are on the other side of the earth, unable to join me or help me." I don't know if it was then or later, but I think perhaps it was then that God reminded her of the promise that he would be a father to the fatherless and a husband to the widow. But it was in that dark moment, she said, that the sweet presence of the Lord swept over her soul. And God gave her the words to a song by Ira Stanphill sang. And she began to sing, "You can have a melody down in your heart when it's aching, almost breaking. Even though the sorrow makes the teardrop start, you can have a melody down in your heart. You can have a song in your heart in the night. After every trial, after every mile, anyone can sing when the sun's shining bright. But you need a song in your heart at night. She said the thoughts came to her, how am I going to feed and care for 5 children? My husband was the breadwinner. I don't have a job or a means of support. How am I going to provide for my family? How am I going to raise my boys through their teenage years without the support and help of their father? But then the words of the second verse came to her. Do not let your worries drive your song away. Though tomorrow brings its sorrow, just remember after nighttime comes the day. Do not let your worries drive your song away. But there was questions about the future. She and my dad had given their love and their lives to reach the Filipino people with the gospel. And at that moment, she said, God, what now? What now? But perhaps it's that third verse, which aligned with her life song and motto that you will hear her sing here in just a few minutes, that explains why my mother accepted when she was presented with the opportunity to stay on the mission field and continue the work my father had started, to give oversight to the Bible school he had established and oversee the churches and church plants that had been started by the graduates of the school. Think about it. That opportunity in and of itself was a miracle, an answer to prayer, because, what mission board would have thought to have a newly widowed single mother of 5 children to be a missionary to represent them? But maybe it explains why she spent the next 50 years of her life involved in ministry, serving as an instructor and dorm mother and all that my brother-in-law has already mentioned. I remember talking to her about retirement. Mom, you're old enough you can retire now. You're in your 80s. Jumping up and down all the time to answer calls for the dorm. And maybe it's time that you think about retiring. But retirement never had any appeal to her. She wanted to keep working for as long as she could. And she had a promise. She just quoted it again to my daughter just this past Friday. And that promise was Deuteronomy 33:25, the latter part of that verse. It says, as thy days, so shall thy strength be. And she did keep working right up to the last few days of her life, completing the 2019-2020 school year. I remember talking to her just the last month or so, and she was still talking about, I got to get all the papers graded. Some of the kids aren't turning in their assignments. And But that third verse says this, soon the night will pass, and morning bring the day. I am longing for its dawning. Until then, we'll labor here and watch and pray. Soon the night will pass, and morning bring the day. And my mom labored and worked for Jesus right up until the Lord called her home.